Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. There are records the world was never meant to see. Tonight we unseal one such file. Case File 734B, officially listed as Unresolved Atmospheric Phenomenon, but known to the few who handled it as the Stillwater Anomaly. It's a story of evidence that defies explanation, of a truth that was systematically buried, and of a question that still echoes in the silence. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some truths are not buried. They are simply erased. Welcome to the Obsidian Archive. Tonight we delve into the files that officially do not exist, examining the evidence that has been labeled inconclusive, anomalous, or more accurately, impossible. Our journey begins in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the sky on October 21st, 1978. 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentic, with 150 solo flying hours, took off in his single-engine Cessna 182L for a routine flight over the Bass Strait in Australia. He was not just flying. He was on a mission to King Island to pick up friends. He was a capable pilot, familiar with the route. Yet neither Valentic nor his aircraft were ever seen again. This isn't just a story of a missing pilot. It is the story of his final, terrifying conversation with air traffic control, a conversation that left behind a single piece of evidence that defies all explanation. At 7:06 p.m., Valentic radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report an unidentified aircraft following him at 4,500 feet. He described it as having 4 bright landing lights and a long shape. He stated it was playing games with him, passing over his aircraft at high speed. The controllers in Melbourne had no record of any aircraft in his vicinity. The official transcript of his final minutes is a chilling descent into the unknown. He reported the object was orbiting above him, its exterior a shiny metal with a green light. His words grew more agitated. "It seems to me that he's playing some sort of game," he transmitted, his voice strained. "He's flying over me 2-3 times at a time at speeds I could not identify." Then, the most disturbing part of the transmission. Valentic reported engine trouble. "My engine is rough idling. I've got it set at 2324, and the thing is coughing." The controller asked him to identify the aircraft. Valentic's reply was haunting. "It's not an aircraft." This was his last clear statement. What followed was 17 seconds of open microphone, filled with a sound that analysts later described as metallic, scraping noises. Then silence. An extensive air and sea search found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no trace of the Cessna. The Department of Transport investigation officially concluded the reason for the disappearance could not be determined. But they left out the most crucial piece of evidence. Years later, a declassified radar plot from that night surfaced. It showed Valentic's Cessna, and for a brief, impossible moment, a second, much larger contact shadowing it. This second blip moved at speeds and trajectories that no known aircraft in 1978 could achieve. It appeared, merged with Valentic's signal, and then both vanished from the screen simultaneously. This radar plot is the vanishing point. It is the physical proof of something inexplicable that shared the sky with Frederick Valentic in his final moments. It is evidence that was never explained. In the autumn of 1993, 4 experienced hikers, the Pine Ridge 4, entered the sprawling, isolated wilderness of the Sierra Nevada for a 2-week trek. They were equipped with top-of-the-line gear, detailed maps, and years of collective experience. They were due to check in at a ranger station on October 12th. They never arrived. The search that followed was one of the largest in the state's history, involving helicopters, ground teams, and canine units. For weeks, they scoured the rugged terrain. They found nothing. No shredded gear, no abandoned campsite, no notes left behind. It was as if the 4 individuals had been plucked from the earth, leaving not even a footprint to mark their passage. The case went cold. Another tragic story of nature claiming its own. That is, until 5 years later. A park ranger, surveying a remote, almost inaccessible granite shelf far off the original trail, found a small, weatherproof bag wedged deep within a rock crevice. Inside was a single 35mm camera, remarkably well preserved. The camera belonged to one of the missing hikers, Maya Tran. The film was carefully extracted and developed by forensics, who hoped it would finally provide answers. Instead, it opened a chasm of new, terrifying questions. The first 22 photos were exactly what you'd expect: breathtaking landscapes, candid shots of the group smiling, setting up camp. They chronicled the first week of a perfect hiking trip. But the last 2 frames were a stark departure into sheer dread. Photo number 23 was a blur of chaotic motion, taken from a low angle, seemingly from the ground looking up. The image is a frantic swirl of green and brown pine needles against a dark, featureless sky. There is no subject, only panic captured on film. The final photo, number 24, is the artifact at the heart of this mystery. It is a perfectly focused, eerily still image of a single bare tree branch against the night sky. But hanging from the branch are 3 small, intricately carved wooden figures, unlike any known indigenous art or craft from the region. They are humanoid, but elongated, with no discernible features. They seem to be looking down at the camera. The composition is deliberate, almost ritualistic. Investigators found no such carvings, no such tree. But the camera held one more secret. On the last few seconds of the audio tape from Maya's camcorder, also in the bag, a faint sound was recorded. It wasn't a cry for help or the sound of an animal. When amplified and filtered, it was a soft, rhythmic clicking, a non-biological sound that audio analysts could not identify. The final photograph and that inexplicable sound are the whispers from Pine Ridge. They are the evidence that was never explained. The sea is a keeper of secrets, but sometimes it offers one up to the surface world, a riddle wrapped in steel and silence. In May of 2003, the deep-sea research vessel Nereus was found adrift in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from any shipping lane. A passing cargo ship reported its position after it failed to respond to any communication attempts. The Coast Guard dispatched a team, expecting to find a scene of mechanical failure or tragedy. What they found was far more disturbing. The ship was in perfect order. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of piracy or a rogue wave. The engines were functional, simply shut down. A half-eaten meal sat on a plate in the galley. Personal effects were neatly stored in the crew's quarters. The life rafts were all in place. Every piece of sensitive research equipment was secured. Everything was exactly as it should be, with one glaring exception. The entire crew of 8 had vanished without a trace. The mystery deepened when the boarding party recovered the ship's logbook. The captain, a meticulous man named Elias Vance, had kept a detailed record of their journey. The entries were professional, noting weather conditions, sea states, and daily research operations. They read as a completely normal account of a scientific expedition. Until the final entry. Dated May 11th, the day before radio contact was lost, the page was different. The first half of the entry was standard, noting calm seas and clear skies. But then, Captain Vance's neat, block-letter handwriting stopped. In its place, taking up the rest of the page, was something else. It was a drawing, executed with an impossibly steady hand. It depicted a series of concentric circles, interconnected with precise geometric lines and symbols that did not correspond to any known language, mathematical system, or maritime code. It was complex, elegant, and utterly alien. Below this intricate diagram was a single word written in the same steady hand. Listen. That was it. No explanation, no distress call, nothing to indicate what had happened to the 8 souls aboard the Nereus. Naval cryptographers, linguists, and symbology experts from around the world studied the logbook entry. They found no precedent. The geometry was flawless, but non-Euclidean. The symbols had a linguistic structure, but were untranslatable. The final word, listen, offered no comfort, only a command to perceive something beyond their understanding. The official report concluded with, cause of disappearance unknown. The ship was silent. The crew was gone. But the logbook speaks. It is a testament to their final, incomprehensible moments, a piece of evidence that was never explained, a radar anomaly that defies physics, a photograph that captures a quiet, ritualistic horror, a logbook entry that reads like a transmission from another reality. These are not clues that lead to a neat conclusion. They are not puzzle pieces that fit together to form a coherent picture. They are fractures in the very foundation of what we believe to be possible. They are the cold trails, the threads that, when pulled, do not unravel a mystery, but instead reveal the vast, tangled knot of the unknown that lies just beneath the surface of our world. For decades, we have been conditioned to believe that every question has an answer, that every effect has a logical cause. We trust in the scientific method, in the diligence of investigators, in the eventual triumph of reason. But what happens when the evidence itself is the thing that breaks the rules? What do we do with a radar signature that moves at impossible speeds? A photograph of something that shouldn't exist? A symbol that has no human origin? The official response is almost always the same. File it away. Label it unresolved. The Valentic case was closed with a shrug, attributing the disappearance to pilot error, despite the contradictory evidence. The Pine Ridge Four were declared victims of the wilderness, the strange photograph dismissed as a prank or a misinterpretation. The crew of the Nereus was presumed lost at sea, the logbook entry a sad testament to a captain's descent into madness. These explanations are comforting. They restore order. But they are not the truth. The truth is that these pieces of evidence, the blip on the screen, the emulsion on the film, the ink on the page, persist. They sit in dusty archive boxes and redacted government files, silent witnesses to events that defy our comprehension. They form a pattern of their own, a mosaic of the inexplicable. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger hidden history of encounters with the truly anomalous. They suggest that we are not always the masters of our own world, that there are forces and phenomena operating on principles we have yet to even imagine. The evidence that was never explained serves as a stark reminder of the limits of our knowledge. It challenges us to look beyond the comfortable and the mundane, to acknowledge the chilling possibility that some questions may never have answers. The trail has gone cold, not because the clues have faded, but because they lead somewhere we are not yet equipped to go, and perhaps somewhere we are not meant to. The archive is full of these cold trails, and they are waiting. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Narrator. The Cold War was a conflict fought not with armies clashing on a battlefield, but in the shadows, in the whispers, and on the airwaves. All across the globe, a network of clandestine listening posts strained to hear the enemy's secrets through a crackle of static. Station Kilo 7, a bleak concrete outpost buried in the permafrost of the Canadian archipelago, was one such place. Its purpose was simple: to monitor Soviet submarine and bomber activity over the pole. For the analysts stationed there, life was a monotonous cycle of long shifts, stale coffee, and the endless hiss of the ether. But on the night of November 12, 1976, an echo came across the wire that was not of this world. Narrator. Analyst Mark Peterson, then only 22 years old, was on duty. He was monitoring a specific band of low-frequency radio waves, expecting the usual subaquatic chatter or atmospheric noise. At 03:14 Zulu time, the hiss on his headphones was cut by a sound unlike any he had ever heard. It wasn't Morse code. It wasn't an encrypted voice transmission. It was a complex rhythmic sequence of tones and clicks, structured with an obvious mathematical precision, yet it followed no known cryptographic pattern. The signal lasted for exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds, before vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. What disturbed Peterson most was the underlying quality of the sound. It was synthetic, clearly artificial, but it possessed a strange, almost biological cadence, like a machine trying to replicate a heartbeat or a song. Narrator. Peterson followed protocol. He recorded the signal, logged the event, and reported it to his superior. The response was immediate and severe. Within hours, a team from a department Peterson had never heard of arrived by helicopter. They confiscated the tape, which was labeled K7 Anomaly 01, along with Peterson's logs. He was subjected to a grueling debriefing, ordered to sign a national security oath binding him to silence, and was transferred to a desk job in Ottawa the next day. The event was officially erased, but the tape, that single reel of magnetic ribbon, became a ghost in the machine. It was a piece of evidence that could never be explained. For decades, it was analyzed in secret labs. Cryptographers failed to break it. Linguists found patterns that resembled syntax, but corresponded to no human language. When subjected to spectrographic analysis, the signal revealed something even more disturbing. Embedded within the audio were geometric patterns of stunning complexity, almost like blueprints or star charts woven into the very fabric of the sound. Theories ran wild within the classified circles that knew of its existence. Was it a failed Soviet experiment in psychological warfare? A naturally occurring but previously unknown cosmic phenomenon? Or was it what Peterson, in his one and only anonymous letter sent 30 years later, believed it to be? A message from something not of this earth, an echo from an intelligence far beyond our own. The tape remains locked away, its origin and meaning a complete mystery. It is a 4-minute question mark, a silent testament to the day something unknown reached out across the void and left an echo on the wire. Narrator. Some evidence isn't an object you can hold or a recording you can analyze. Sometimes the evidence is a person, a living, breathing anomaly who walks into our world and leaves behind nothing but impossible questions. Such is the case of the man who would become known only as the Traveler. The story begins on a storm-lashed night in October 1972 on a desolate stretch of Highway 50 in rural Nevada. State Trooper Miller was on a routine patrol when his headlights caught a figure standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the road, oblivious to the torrential downpour. He pulled over, expecting to find a motorist in distress. What he found was something else entirely. Narrator. The man was dressed in a pristine dark gray wool suit, tailored in a style popular in the late 1940s. It was completely soaked, yet he seemed unbothered by the cold. He carried no wallet, no identification, no keys. When Trooper Miller spoke to him, the man didn't respond. He simply stared, not with fear or confusion, but with a profound, unnerving placidity. He was taken to the county sheriff's office. His fingerprints were run through every database available. There were no matches. A dental examination revealed perfect teeth with no signs of any dental work, something highly unusual for an adult at the time. His clothes were meticulously examined. They bore no manufacturing labels of any kind. He was a complete blank slate, a ghost. Narrator. The only items found in his pockets became the central, inexplicable pieces of evidence. The first was a heavy silver pocket watch. Its hands moved smoothly, but counterclockwise, ticking backward through time. The second was a small, perfectly smooth ovular stone, pitch black and unnaturally cold to the touch, feeling like a shard of frozen night. For 3 days, authorities tried to communicate with him. They brought in translators for a dozen languages, psychologists, and even priests. He remained silent, his calm gaze never wavering. He refused all food and water, yet showed no signs of dehydration or fatigue. He didn't appear to sleep. He simply sat in his cell, a human enigma. The mystery deepened on the 4th day. At the morning check, the cell was empty. The door was still locked from the outside, the window barred. The man in the rain was gone. He had vanished without a trace. The only thing left behind was the cold, black stone, resting in the center of the cot. The pocket watch, kept in an evidence locker, had stopped ticking the moment he disappeared. The man himself was the evidence that was never explained. Was he a time traveler, accidentally displaced and unable to cope with our world? A foreign agent with unbreakable mental conditioning? Or something far stranger, a visitor from a place with different rules of existence? He left no answers, only a chilling memory and 2 impossible artifacts that defy logical explanation. Narrator. Time is a constant. It moves relentlessly forward, a river carrying us from one moment to the next. But what if, for one night, in one isolated place, that river stopped? What if it fractured, leaving behind a scene of impossible contradictions? Welcome to the mystery of the St. Jude's Reach Lighthouse, a lonely granite sentinel off the coast of Maine, and the baffling evidence left behind by its 3 vanished keepers. In December of 1963, the lighthouse simply went dark. A supply ship, arriving for its weekly drop-off, found the station completely deserted. The 3 keepers, Thomas Griffith, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, were gone. There were no signs of violence, no distress calls. The last log entry, dated Tuesday, December 10th, was mundane, noting calm seas and good visibility. The mystery, however, wasn't in what was missing, but in what was left behind. Narrator. The Coast Guard investigation uncovered a scene that defied all logic. The core of the enigma lay with two timepieces. In the lantern room at the top of the tower, the massive, mechanically independent chronometer had stopped. In the living quarters far below, a grandfather clock, powered by its own separate system of weights and pulleys, had also stopped. Both were frozen at the exact same second. 02 hours, 17 minutes, and 44 seconds. The official report concluded they must have stopped on the morning of Wednesday, December 11th. But this is where the evidence became impossible. On the kitchen table, a full meal of steak and potatoes was laid out for 3 men. The food was cold, but fresh, barely a day old, suggesting it had been prepared on Thursday, the 12th. An overturned chair suggested a sudden departure from this meal. In the common room, a half-finished game of chess sat on a small table. An analysis of the board position by a grandmaster concluded that the game was in a complex late stage, implying the players had been at it for hours, long after the clocks had supposedly stopped. It was a temporal paradox. The clocks marked a definitive end point, a moment when the heart of the lighthouse ceased to beat. Yet the scene itself provided clear evidence that life, routine and mundane, had continued for at least another 24 to 36 hours after that moment. It was as if the keepers had lived through a day that the clocks never recorded. Investigators were baffled. How could 2 separate clocks fail at the exact same instant? And how could the men continue their lives after this supposed failure? The only other piece of anomalous evidence was a series of deep, vertical scratches on the inside of the thick lantern room glass, as if one of the men had been desperately clawing at it from a height of 150 feet above the churning Atlantic. The case remains open, a chilling puzzle of temporal dissonance. The 2 clocks, silent and synchronized in their final moment, are the evidence that was never explained, marking a time that was both an end and a beginning. Narrator. Humanity has spent centuries mastering the elements, bending metal and material to our will. We believe we understand the fundamental building blocks of our world. But deep within the planet, hidden from sight, there may be substances that shatter our understanding of physics. In 1988, a deep-sea submersible, the Odyssey, was mapping an uncharted volcanic vent system in the Pacific's Tonga Trench, one of the deepest points on Earth. Its mission was geological, but what it found was technological. Lying half-buried in the silt, crushed by pressures that would pulverize a tank, was a structure. It wasn't a known shipwreck or submarine. The sonar scans revealed clean, geometric lines and a design that was both ancient and impossibly advanced. The submersible's robotic arm managed to break off a small, twisted fragment from the hull before a seismic tremor forced it to ascend. Narrator. That fragment, no larger than a human hand, would become one of the most secret and perplexing artifacts in modern science. Back in a secure materials lab in Los Alamos, the Tonga Shard began to reveal its impossible nature. It was a metallic alloy, but one that defied every known law of material science. It had a density lower than aluminum, yet its tensile strength was more than double that of the best titanium alloys. It was completely inert. It would not corrode in acid, and it reflected radar and sonar signals with almost zero return. Its thermal properties were the most baffling. It was subjected to temperatures of over 4,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to vaporize tungsten yet it didn't even glow. It simply absorbed the heat. Chilled down, it exhibited another paradox. At a strangely high temperature of minus 50 degrees Celsius, it became a perfect superconductor. Mass spectrometry revealed an isotopic ratio that didn't match any known element or combination of elements on the periodic table. It was, for all intents and purposes, alien. Narrator. The project was immediately given a classification far beyond top secret. The Odyssey's dive logs were altered, the crew was debriefed and reassigned, and the official report stated the discovery of an anomalous mineral deposit. The shard was locked away, and its existence was denied. For years it was a rumor, a whisper among a handful of scientists. But in 2005, a dying physicist who had been on the original analysis team broke his oath. He anonymously leaked a single page of the spectral analysis, a chaotic scrawl of peaks and troughs that no one could interpret, and one grainy photo of the shard. This fragment of metal is the ultimate piece of evidence that was never explained. Is it a remnant of a non-human craft that crashed into our oceans eons ago? Is it proof of a lost, hyper-advanced terrestrial civilization? Or is it something even more profound? A naturally occurring material from the Earth's mantle, a substance whose properties could rewrite physics and usher in a new age of technology, forever locked away from the world it could transform. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Narrator. In the sprawling, labyrinthine archives of the Unexplained, there exists a recurring phantom, a chilling archetype that surfaces in the wake of profound anomalies. They are not the evidence itself, but the suppressors of it, the erasers of memory. They arrive in vehicles that are always immaculate, always black, and utterly devoid of identifying marks. They are the men in black, but to call them that is to simplify a phenomenon that defies easy categorization. We are talking about the black sedans and the silent, unnerving figures who emerge from them. Consider the case of Dr. Eris Thorne, a respected astrophysicist who, in 1967, recorded a series of structured, non-terrestrial radio signals from a remote observatory in the Nevada desert. His findings were groundbreaking, potentially world-altering. He documented everything meticulously in his personal logbook. 2 days after his discovery, before he could present his data to his peers, 2 men visited his home. They didn't arrive in a government vehicle. They pulled up in a vintage but flawless 1950s Cadillac sedan, a car that was already an anachronism. Thorne's wife later testified that the men were pale, with oddly plastic-like skin and large, dark sunglasses that seemed to absorb all light. They didn't threaten him. They simply asked him to recount his discovery, which he did. Then one of them told him, "The subject is a matter of national and existential insecurity. It is best forgotten." When they left, Thorne discovered his logbook, the magnetic tapes, and all his handwritten notes were gone. Not stolen in a conventional sense. They had simply vanished from his locked office. The only evidence that remained was the testimony of a terrified man whose career was later ruined by accusations of fabricating data he could no longer produce. This is the pattern. The evidence they leave behind is a vacuum, an absence where proof once existed. They are the curators of the unexplained, ensuring it remains that way, by surgically removing the very possibility of explanation. They are not government agents in any recognizable sense. Witnesses describe them as being slightly out of sync with reality. Their speech patterns are stilted, their movements too precise, their knowledge of a witness's personal life impossibly intimate. They ask questions that make no sense, inquiring about mundane details of a witness's childhood breakfast on the day of a sighting, as if testing the integrity of their memory. Are they a psychological warfare unit designed to discredit witnesses? Or are they something else? The evidence isn't a crashed saucer or an alien body. It's the unnerving consistency of these encounters across decades and continents. The evidence is the fear, the stolen time, and the lingering, chilling certainty in the minds of those they visit that they have just encountered something not entirely human. The black sedans are not just vehicles. They are harbingers, signaling that you have touched a truth you were never meant to find. Narrator. Deep within the sub-basements of national security archives, beyond the reach of freedom of information requests, lie documents that should not exist. They are not records of espionage or military strategy. They are catalogs of the impossible. We have obtained fragments, whispers of one such collection, known only by its chillingly sterile designation, Project Umbra, Case File 731. This is not a file about foreign threats. It is a file of ghosts. The documents, heavily redacted and likely apocryphal, describe a series of events beginning in the late 1970s at a decommissioned nuclear submarine listening post, built deep into the granite of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The facility, designated Echo Station, was officially mothballed. But according to these fragmented reports, it was secretly repurposed as a sensory deprivation research center. The objective? To study the long-term psychological effects of absolute silence and isolation on elite military personnel. But the researchers found something else in the silence. The first reports are clinical. Test subjects complained of auditory hallucinations, whispers in the static between recordings, footsteps in empty corridors. Standard paranoia, the project leads assumed. Then security personnel on patrol began reporting the same phenomena. Motion sensors would trigger in sealed empty chambers. Infrared cameras would record cold spots that moved with intelligent purpose against the ambient warmth of the rock. The file contains technical schematics, diagrams of the facility overlaid with energy signatures that have no source. The most disturbing piece of evidence is the transcript of an audio recording from Chamber Delta, dated October 1981. The subject, a Marine captain with a perfect psychological record, had been in isolation for 38 days. For hours, there was only the sound of his breathing. Then a second set of breathing is heard on the tape. It is faint, raspy, and doesn't match the captain's rhythm. The captain suddenly screams, "Who's in here? Identify yourself!" The other breathing stops. A low-frequency hum, previously undetected by the instruments, spikes. Then, a voice, clear and close to the microphone, says a single word, in a language later identified by linguists as a dead Proto-Indo-European dialect. The word was release. The captain was removed from the chamber in a catatonic state and was institutionalized for the rest of his life. Project Umbra was allegedly shut down immediately. All records were classified at a level far above top secret. The file itself is the unexplained evidence. It is a meticulously compiled, scientifically rigorous account of events that defy all known laws of physics and biology. Is it an elaborate fabrication? A piece of disinformation designed to mask a more conventional but equally dark secret? Or is it proof that in the process of studying the human mind, the researchers at Echo Station inadvertently opened a door to somewhere else. The file doesn't provide answers. It is a ghost in the machine of bureaucracy, a collection of data points that form the blueprint of a nightmare. Narrator: the line between scientific breakthrough and moral catastrophe is often invisible until it has been crossed. History is filled with whispers of clandestine experiments that sacrificed ethics for the sake of knowledge or power. But some whispers refuse to fade. They speak of a program so audacious, so terrifyingly ambitious, that its very existence is officially denied with a vehemence that betrays a deeper fear. They speak of Project Chimera. This isn't a story you'll find in any declassified archive. Its evidence is a trail of digital breadcrumbs, leaked by anonymous sources, and pieced together by investigators in the dark corners of the web. The fragments paint a horrifying picture. Beginning in the early 1990s, a secretive biogenetics firm, funded through a complex web of shell corporations leading back to black-budget defense contracts, began research into gene splicing and interspecies hybridization. The stated goal was medical, creating hybrid organs for transplant, developing radical new therapies. But the recovered data fragments suggest a far more sinister objective. We have a single page from a lab technician's journal, scanned and uploaded before the original was presumably destroyed. It reads, "Subject 4B is non-viable. The avian respiratory system cannot support the mammalian circulatory structure, but it lived for 17 minutes. It made a sound. I will hear that sound in my sleep forever." Another piece of evidence is a partial schematic, not for a machine, but for a living creature. It shows the skeletal structure of a primate, but with modifications to the bone density and musculature that are biomechanically impossible, designed for strength and speed beyond any natural limit. But the most chilling artifact of Project Chimera is a 30-second audio file, corrupted and filled with static, known as the Chimera Cry. It was allegedly recorded from within a containment cell at a remote underground facility in the Utah desert. The sound is guttural, a layered shriek that seems to contain the vocalizations of multiple animals at once, all synthesized into a single expression of pure agony and rage. Bioacoustic analysts have been unable to match it to any known creature on Earth. The project, according to the leaks, ended in disaster. A containment breach, a facility purged and buried under tons of concrete. There are no survivors, no official records, only these disparate, terrifying pieces of data. This is the nature of the evidence that can never be fully explained. It is incomplete by design. The creators of Project Chimera did not just bury their failures. They atomized the proof, scattering it, so that no single piece is definitive. Yet when assembled, the fragments, the journal entry, the schematic, the audio file, tell a consistent and dreadful story. They are whispers that testify to the ultimate transgression, the attempt to rewrite the very grammar of life. Was Project Chimera real? The evidence doesn't allow us to say for certain, but it forces us to ask a more disturbing question. What other sounds are being buried in the silence of the desert night? Narrator. In our search for answers within the Obsidian Archive, we often find ourselves facing walls of silence, redaction, and denial. The trail grows cold. The evidence evaporates. But sometimes, something comes back from the void. Several months ago, a package arrived at our post office box. It bore no return address and was postmarked from a town that doesn't officially exist. A small, unincorporated community in the heart of New Mexico. Inside was not a videotape or a classified file, but a single, typewritten letter. The paper was old, a heavy fibrous stock that hasn't been commercially produced in 40 years. The text was written on a manual typewriter, the kind with a slightly misaligned E and a faint ink bleed on the S. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to identify the sender. The letter was the evidence. It was an artifact from a ghost. It did not offer explanations. It offered a warning and a thread. The letter began without a salutation. You look for monsters in the shadows. You should be looking at the men who build the shadows. The sedans are not the threat. They are the janitors. Umbra was not an observation. It was a conversation. Chimera was not a failure. It was a success. Each sentence was a chilling recontextualization of the mysteries we have explored. The author claimed to be a former archivist, not for a government, but for a consortium, a shadow organization dedicated not to hiding the truth, but to pruning it, curating reality itself, to guide humanity's development along a specific path. The letter claimed that these phenomena, the visitors, the entities, the genetic creations, were not random occurrences. They were controlled variables in a long-form experiment. The author wrote of a place called the Silent Library, not a collection of books, but a repository of aborted timelines and suppressed realities. A place where the evidence that was never explained is stored not as files, but as quarantined pockets of existence. The letter is filled with cryptic phrases and numerical sequences that we are still working to decipher. But it ended with a set of geographic coordinates. They do not point to a military base or a government building. They point to a seemingly empty patch of desert, hundreds of miles from any known road. The final line of the letter reads, "Some things are not explained, because they are not from a history you have lived. Come and see what was pruned." Is this letter a hoax, the elaborate fiction of a disturbed individual? Or is it the most significant piece of evidence we have ever encountered? Its existence is undeniable. We hold it in our hands. Its contents are unverified, perhaps unverifiable. It is the ultimate piece of unexplained evidence because it claims that everything, all the disparate files, all the isolated events, all the whispers in the dark, are connected. The letter is a map, and we are left with the terrifying choice of whether or not to follow it. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some truths are not meant to be found. They are meant to find you. Narrator. We build our world on a foundation of rules. Gravity pulls us down. Light travels in a straight line. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. These are the pillars of physics, the bedrock of our reality. But what happens when the bedrock cracks? What happens when evidence surfaces that simply refuses to obey the rules? For decades, in the remote Hessdalen Valley of Norway, the rules have been breaking. Since at least the 1940s, residents have witnessed strange, silent lights in the sky. They are not aircraft. They are not meteors. They are not swamp gas. They are luminous, geometric objects, spheres, triangles, pyramids of light that hover, dart at impossible speeds, and sometimes appear to pulse with intelligence. In the 1980s, scientists established Project Hessdalen, a permanent research station to study the phenomenon. They have captured the lights on camera, on radar, and on spectrographs. Their findings are staggering. The radar data shows objects moving at over 8,500 meters per second, and then stopping instantaneously. The spectrographs show a composition unlike any known natural or man-made light source. The scientists running the project, armed with the best equipment available, have admitted they cannot explain it. This is not anecdotal evidence. This is instrument data. It is a persistent, documented anomaly that operates at the very edge of what we consider physically possible. The evidence exists, but the explanation does not. Then there is the evidence you can hold in your hand. In 1957, off the coast of Ubatuba, Brazil, an object reportedly exploded in the sky, scattering metallic fragments onto a beach. Samples were sent for analysis to the Brazilian government and later to researchers in the United States. The results were confounding. The fragments were magnesium of an astonishing purity, far beyond the capabilities of 1957 metallurgical technology. Furthermore, its isotopic density was different from terrestrial magnesium. It was, for all intents and purposes, a material that should not have existed on Earth at that time. The official file remains inconclusive, a piece of physical evidence that points to an origin story our science cannot write. It sits in an archive, a metallic ghost challenging our understanding of material science. These are not isolated incidents. From alleged metamaterials with impossible isotopic ratios recovered from crash sites to biological effects on witnesses exposed to UAP, the archives are filled with physical data that defies our models. The evidence that was never explained isn't just a story or a blurry photograph. Sometimes it's a piece of metal. Sometimes it's a spectrographic signature. It's a cold, hard fact that tells us the limits of our knowledge are not the limits of reality. Narrator. The human mind is a fragile instrument, easily swayed by suggestion, fear, and the desire to believe. The official explanation for group sightings of the impossible often defaults to a simple, dismissive term: mass hysteria. It's a convenient label that files away inconvenient truths. But can it truly account for events witnessed with shocking clarity and consistency by hundreds, even thousands, of people at once? Consider September 16, 1994, at the Aerial School in Rua, Zimbabwe. During their morning recess, over 60 school children watched as a silver disc-shaped craft descended from the sky and landed in a field near their playground. They saw beings with large, dark eyes emerge from the craft. The children, aged between 6 and 12, were terrified. When the teachers, who had been inside at a meeting, finally came out, the event was over. But the aftermath had just begun. The children were interviewed separately, mere hours after the incident. They were asked to draw what they saw. Dozens of drawings, all telling the same story. A silver disc, tall, thin beings in black suits, large, captivating eyes that seemed to communicate without words. Esteemed Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack flew to Zimbabwe to investigate. He concluded the children were not fabricating their story. They were describing a real, profoundly impactful event. To dismiss over 60 separate, consistent testimonies from sober, lucid children as mass hysteria is to stretch the definition of the term to its breaking point. It becomes a psychological explanation used to avoid a physical one. Their shared reality became one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that was never explained. 3 years later, on the night of March 13, 1997, the phenomenon scaled up. Across a 300-mile corridor of Arizona, from the Nevada border through Phoenix to the edge of Tucson, tens of thousands of people witnessed a series of inexplicable lights. The event had two distinct waves. First, A colossal V-shaped craft, estimated to be a mile wide, flew silently over the state. Witnesses from all walks of life, pilots, police officers, families on their porches, described the same thing. A silent, massive object that blotted out the stars. Later that night, a separate event involving a string of stationary amber orbs appeared over the Estrella Mountains. The military's official explanation was that the second event was simply military flares. This explanation, however, completely ignored the first, much larger and more widely seen object. It did not account for the silence, the scale, or the trajectory of the V-shaped craft. Thousands of people saw the same impossible thing. Were they all hysterical? Was the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, who also witnessed the craft, hysterical? The Phoenix Lights were not a delusion. They were a public spectacle, a shared experience on a massive scale. The evidence is the testimony itself, a chorus of voices describing an event that, according to the official narrative, never happened. Narrator: history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. In the archives of the Unexplained, this is more than a saying. It is a fundamental truth. When you examine anomalous events separated by centuries and continents, you begin to see not a collection of random, disconnected mysteries, but a persistent, recurring pattern. A signal that has been broadcasting through the noise of human history for millennia. The evidence is not in one event, but in the chilling echo between them. Look to the ancient world. The prophet Ezekiel's biblical account of a wheel within a wheel descending from the sky, filled with eyes and moving with intelligent purpose. The Vimanas described in ancient Hindu texts, like the Mahabharata, flying palaces or chariots capable of incredible speeds and wielding powerful energies. Petroglyphs from cultures across the globe depicting humanoid figures with large heads and strange suits, often descending from objects in the sky. For centuries, these were interpreted as mythology, as metaphors for spiritual events. But when viewed through a modern lens, they read like technical descriptions, attempts by ancient people to document advanced technology using the language of their time. The pattern of strange objects in the sky is not a 20th century invention. Now, fast forward through time. During World War II, Allied and Axis pilots alike reported being followed by small metallic spheres of light they nicknamed Foo Fighters. These objects would pace their aircraft, performing maneuvers that defied the known aerodynamics of the era. They were never hostile, but they were always there, observing. The official explanation was mass hallucination due to combat stress. Yet pilots from opposing sides, who never communicated with each other, described the exact same phenomenon. The pattern repeats. Jump to the skies over Belgium in 1989. For months, thousands of citizens, including police officers and military personnel, witnessed large, silent, black triangles moving slowly over the countryside. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 fighter jets to intercept. The objects were locked onto by airborne and ground-based radar. The jets would close in, only for the triangles to accelerate to impossible speeds or vanish from radar instantly. The radar tapes, the pilot testimonies, the photographs, they all exist. And the shape, the silent, massive triangle, has become a recurring motif in sightings around the world, from the Hudson Valley in the 1980s to the tic-tac encounters of the 21st century. Discs, spheres, triangles. Silent flight. Impossible acceleration. Observation without communication. The technology may evolve, but the core characteristics remain eerily consistent. It suggests we are not dealing with a series of unrelated mysteries, but with chapters of the same ongoing story. A story written in the sky, whose full text remains the evidence that was never explained. Narrator. In the search for truth, sometimes the most compelling evidence isn't what you find, but what you find has been hidden. For every unexplained event, there are two stories: the story of what was witnessed and the story of the official response. And it is in the chasm between these two narratives, in the redactions, the denials, and the deliberate misdirections, that we find the darkest and most profound mystery of all. It is a system of engineered ignorance. Consider Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's decades-long study of UFOs. Its public conclusion was that there was no evidence of a threat to national security or of technology beyond our own. But beneath that placid surface, the project's own data told a different story. The USAF's own statistical analysis, Blue Book Special Report 14, concluded that the more detailed and credible a sighting was, the more likely it was to be categorized as unknown. The very best evidence was the most inexplicable. This crucial finding was buried. Before Blue Book, there was the Twining Memo of 1947, a classified document from a high-ranking general stating that the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious, describing the objects as having extreme rates of climb and maneuverability. This was the internal assessment, while the public was fed stories of weather balloons and misidentified planets. This pattern of obfuscation was not accidental, it was policy. In 1953, the CIA convened the Robertson Panel, a group of scientists tasked with evaluating the UFO phenomenon. Their public report was dismissive. Their classified recommendations, however, were chilling. They recommended a national policy of debunking, using the mass media, advertising, and even entertainment companies like Walt Disney Productions to strip the phenomenon of its aura of mystery. They advised surveillance of civilian UFO groups. The goal was not to solve the mystery, but to manage public perception of it, to make it a subject of ridicule, ensuring it would never be taken seriously by the mainstream. This legacy continues today. We see it in the slow, reluctant trickle of declassified information from programs like AATIP. We see it in the Navy's official confirmation that UAP videos are authentic, coupled with a refusal to speculate on their origin. We see it in the heavily redacted documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests, where entire pages are blacked out, leaving only tantalizing prepositions and conjunctions. The black ink on those pages is, itself, a form of evidence. It is evidence of a secret. The official narrative is not a conclusion based on a lack of evidence. It is a wall built to hide it. The most significant piece of evidence that was never explained may not be a strange light in the sky, but the vast and sophisticated architecture of secrecy that has been constructed on the ground to prevent us from ever understanding it. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some secrets are not buried to be forgotten, but to be found. In the archives of the Unexplained, some files are not merely old, they are dormant. They lie in wait, insulated by decades of dust and official denial, their contents pulsing with a quiet, residual energy. This is the story of one such file, a collection of evidence that went into a long, deep sleep, only to reawaken in our modern age, more unsettling than ever before. Our story begins in the cold shadow of the 1970s, at a facility that officially never existed beyond a few vague budget line items, the St. Augustine Hypnagogic Research Institute. Publicly, it was a sleep disorder clinic. Privately, funded by obscure defense grants, its mandate was far more esoteric. They weren't just studying sleep. They were trying to map the very architecture of consciousness. They were chasing the phantoms that live in the twilight state between waking and dreaming, believing that within this liminal space lay the keys to human potential, or perhaps something more. Then, in the autumn of 1973, it all stopped. The facility was shuttered overnight. Staff were reassigned, their research classified at the highest levels, and the building was left to decay. The official story was a funding cut. The rumors, however, spoke of an experiment that went catastrophically wrong. For 25 years, the Institute was a ghost, a concrete skeleton, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Until 1998, when a demolition crew was tasked with leveling the site. Deep in a sub-basement, behind a brick wall that appeared on no blueprints, they found a lead-lined container. Inside were 24 reel-to-reel audio tapes. The labels were simple, stark, Project Somnis, followed by a date and a subject number. There were no logbooks, no research notes, no context, just the tapes. This discovery triggered a quiet alarm within certain government departments. The tapes were confiscated before the demolition crew's shift even ended. They were not studied. They were not analyzed. They were buried again. This time not in a brick tomb, but in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of a national security archive. They were given a case number and a classification level that ensured no one would ever have the clearance to request them. This was their long sleep. A piece of evidence, an echo from a forgotten experiment, locked away from the world. The questions it might have answered were deemed too dangerous to even ask. What was recorded on those tapes? Why were they hidden with such care, first by the scientists and then by the government? The silence surrounding Project Somnis was absolute, a void of information that only amplified the mystery. The evidence was not just unexplained. It was intentionally quarantined from explanation itself. Decades passed. The world changed, but the Somnis tapes remained in their climate-controlled tomb, a forgotten footnote in a classified ledger. Their slumber might have been eternal, were it not for the one thing even the most secure systems are vulnerable to: human error and relentless curiosity. In 2019, a massive digitization initiative was underway to preserve deteriorating government records. A junior archivist, working through a backlog of declassification requests, stumbled upon the Project Somnis file. Its security designation had been partially and incorrectly downgraded by an automated system years prior, making it visible, if not entirely accessible. Intrigued by the sparse, heavily redacted file notes mentioning bioacoustic phenomena and non-standard cognitive expression, the archivist filed a formal request to analyze the physical media for preservation purposes. To everyone's surprise, the request was approved. The Somnis tapes were disinterred and delivered to a small, underfunded audio forensics lab. The team, accustomed to restoring presidential speeches and wiretap recordings, was immediately struck by the strangeness of their task. The tapes were in remarkably good condition, their magnetic ribbons preserved within the lead-lined case. But the initial playback was deeply disappointing. It was noise, hours and hours of what sounded like low-frequency static, a deep, guttural hum, and the occasional, inexplicable crackle. There were no voices, no discernible sounds, nothing to justify the extreme secrecy. The project was deemed a dead end, another Cold War relic of paranoia and wasted resources. The team was ready to label the tapes as degraded beyond recovery and send them back to the void. But one audio engineer, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, refused to let it go. She was haunted by the quality of the static. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a cadence that felt almost biological, like the breathing of some vast, sleeping creature. Working late on her own time, she ran the recordings through a suite of experimental signal processing algorithms, software designed to find patterns in the chaos of deep space radio transmissions. For weeks, she found nothing. Then one night she applied a fractal noise filter and a deconvolution algorithm used to clarify seismic data. And that's when she saw it. Hidden deep beneath the layers of static, like a fossil embedded in rock, was a signal. It was faint, structured, and utterly coherent. It wasn't just a sound. It was a voice. The hum that permeated the tapes wasn't interference. It was a carrier wave, deliberately designed to obscure the information it carried. The signal had resurfaced. After 46 years of silence, Project Somnis was beginning to speak. The team gathered around the monitor, watching as Thorne isolated the first clean segment of audio. The silence in the lab was absolute as she prepared to play the sound that a secret government program had tried so hard to bury forever. The air in the lab was thick with anticipation as Dr. Thorne pressed play. What emerged from the speakers was not a scream, not a secret code, not a confession. It was a voice, speaking calmly and without inflection. It was a human voice, yet it was profoundly alien. The language it spoke was a ghost. It matched no known dialect, ancient or modern. It possessed a complex, recursive grammar that baffled the linguists who were brought in to consult in secret. They could identify phonemes, the basic building blocks of speech, but the way they were assembled was utterly foreign. It was a language that should not exist. Using pattern-matching AI, the team began the painstaking process of cross-referencing the unknown words with the subject's galvanic skin response and EEG data, which were encoded as metadata on the tapes. They slowly, painstakingly began to translate fragments. And what they found was impossible. The voice belonging to a subject identified only as S7 was not speaking from a dream. It seemed to be narrating from a perspective unbound by linear time. In a flat monotone, S7 described the precise orbital mechanics of exoplanets that wouldn't be discovered for another 30 years. It recited complex protein folding sequences that were at the bleeding edge of 21st century biochemistry. It gave detailed, dispassionate accounts of events, not from the past, but from the future. It spoke of a fracturing of the sky in 2042, a silent bloom in the Pacific Ocean, and the birth of a city of light on a moon of Saturn. The descriptions were poetic, yet filled with verifiable scientific data that the researchers of 1973 could not possibly have known. It was a voice from the threshold, a narrator standing outside of our perception of reality, simply describing the landscape. More chillingly, the voice would occasionally refer to the researchers in the room, the researchers from 1973. It would describe their thoughts, their fears, their hidden secrets, as if it were reading from a book. One translated fragment read, "The man in the corner, Dr. Albright, fears the shape of the shadow his own heart casts. He thinks of the water, always the water." Records confirmed a Dr. Albright was the project lead. He retired abruptly, and years later was reported to have drowned. The Somnis tapes were not a recording of a dream. They were a transcript of an omniscience. The evidence was irrefutable. A human being in a controlled state of sleep was accessing information that was physically and temporally impossible to possess. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a fundamental violation of the known laws of physics and causality. The question was no longer what the evidence was, but what it implied about the nature of consciousness itself. The discovery of the voice on the Somnis tapes did not lead to a scientific revolution. It led to a shutdown. As Dr. Thorne and her team began to compile their staggering findings, their work attracted attention from the same unseen corridors of power that had buried the tapes in the first place. The project was halted with brutal efficiency. One morning, the team arrived to find their lab sealed. Men in quiet suits, bearing credentials from a nondescript intelligence agency, were waiting. They were all debriefed, reminded of the national security oaths they had signed, and forced to sign new, far more restrictive, non-disclosure agreements. Their research data, the digital copies of the tapes, and all of their notes were confiscated. The official explanation, which later appeared in a heavily censored internal report leaked by a whistleblower, was that the anomalous auditory phenomena were the result of a sophisticated Soviet hoax, an attempt to poison American intelligence with paradoxical information. The voice, the report concluded, was a computer-generated fabrication. This explanation was a fiction. The team knew it. The voice on the tapes contained a richness of acoustic detail, a subtle complexity that was beyond the capabilities of any 1970s technology. The data it spoke of was not paradoxical. It was prescient. The file was closed. The signal, once again, was silenced. The original Somnis tapes were remanded to a sub-level archival facility known only as Quarry Site, a place from which information never returns. But the evidence, like an echo, persists. Dr. Thorne, who left the field entirely and now lives in quiet seclusion, is rumored to have kept a single encrypted hard drive with a few seconds of the original audio. The whistleblower who leaked the report vanished a week after the document appeared online. The questions left in the wake of Project Somnis are as vast and disturbing as the content of the tapes themselves. Were the researchers at the St. Augustine Institute successful? Did they open a door in the human mind? A door that looks out onto the whole of time and space? Was the voice that of the subject, or was the subject merely a receiver for a signal from somewhere else? A signal from the future? Or from something that doesn't perceive time at all? We are left with nothing but the ghost of a voice and a file stamped closed. The evidence remains unexplained and unexplainable, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound discoveries are not celebrated in headlines, but are buried in silence, deemed too dangerous for a world that isn't ready to hear them.